Guys, have you heard the news? The new War of the Worlds movie is bad.
Oh my God.
You probably did know that. The film, a loose adaptation of the classic science fiction novel of Martian invasion and presented here entirely through the desktop screen of its protagonist, landed on Amazon Prime this summer and instantly became a punchline. A film so laughably terrible, it harkened back to the bad movie glory of films like Morbius, Madam Web, and even Cats. Like those cinematic gems, War of the Worlds isn't some cheapo junk. It's a star-studded big studio disaster.
How could you, man? How could you?
Don't let the streaming release or excessive on-screen Amazon glazing fool you. This is not a Prime original. War of the Worlds was produced by Universal and was intended for a theatrical release until the studio got a look at the movie they made, realized it was unsellable, and dumped it on Amazon. Watching War of the Worlds for myself, I understood that decision. To highlight just a few of the film's failings. Ice Cube's performance, his face only conveying two emotions, confused and mildly annoyed. That Ice Cube spends the entire movie against a green screen despite his only location being an office building. You can also see the reflection of the green screen in Cube's glasses in a couple of shots. The plot is stitched together from stock footage and clunky voiceover.
Here we go.
Been waiting to take down the government for years.
What is this? What the hell are those things? Collecting data? Oh man.
The special effects would be subpar for a Tubi original. The invasion is a surprise because all the Earth's satellites were destroyed by a barrage of asteroids. Apparently, the satellites didn't report a barrage of asteroids headed their way. A key plot point hinges on showcasing Amazon Prime Air, a drone delivery system.
It's the future of delivery.
The producer insists this wasn't a paid product placement, which is highly dubious, and if true, actually makes the scene even more embarrassing. This chase scene, which is supposed to be this desperate set piece where Cube remote pilots a Tesla to race through Martian-ravaged streets, but the car camera POVs show calm and orderly traffic. This scene where Cube's son watches all of his best friends and comrades get vaporized by Martian heat waves, but doesn't break a sweat because he's okay.
That was freaking intense. I'm chilling at Brian's house.
Cube's hackneyed character arc about letting go of his dead wife and giving his adult children more autonomy or whatever. His children, who are a super genius biologist daughter on the cusp of curing cancer, and a super genius hacker's son fighting against the tyranny of big government. Put a pin in these, they will matter. The fact that large chunks of the movie take place in real time, meaning a war against Martians begins, is fought, and ultimately won, all while a deep state surveillance conspiracy is uncovered and brought to justice in the span of a single day. If you were sleeping off a hangover, you might not even know Martians had invaded. If I can highlight a personal favorite moment, so, Ice Cube plays a Department of Homeland Security officer overseeing surveillance systems used against Americans, which naturally puts him at odds with his hacker son. So at a heightened moment during the Martian invasion, hacker son sends Cube a zip file revealing all of the government's deep dark secrets. Cube insists nothing in that file will change his mind. But then he opens the file, and 30 seconds later he's like, "Oh my god, my son was right, the government lied to me."
Dave was right. He lied to me the whole time.
This is also all it takes to get Ice Cube to join a hacker terrorist group and start launching cyber attacks against the government, but also still using all his same technologies from his DHS job to fight the Martians.
Are you serious?
Needless to say, War of the Worlds is a fun movie to mock.
Kiss my ass, Briggs.
It's not surprising that the online film community turned it into a meme, feasting on clicks and milking the film for all the lulz they could. But by now you might be thinking, okay, but why are you talking about it? I'm not typically one to make videos dunking on bad movies, and even if I were, I'm several months late to the party. War of the Worlds dropped in July. Surely no one still cares about this movie. We've all moved on to dunking on Tron Ares, right? Well, here's the thing. Right around the time War of the Worlds was racking up hate watches on Amazon, I stumbled across H.G. Wells' original novel and read it for the first time. And I enjoyed it a lot. In fact, I enjoyed it so much that I was inspired to finally pick up the Criterion of the 1953 version. And I enjoyed that so much that I decided to revisit the Steven Spielberg version from 2005, a film which terrified me when I first saw it at a friend's birthday party in 6th grade, and which I've only grown to love more fully in adulthood. And in this context, War of the Worlds 2025 wasn't just a bad movie to be dunked on over pizza and beers, it was part of a vast lineage of War of the Worldses, the next chapter in a long history of Wells's novel being reimagined for new generations. And as bad as you might think this new War of the Worlds is as a movie, believe me when I say it is infinitely worse as an adaptation. To be clear, the problem with the movie is not that it's unfaithful to the source novel. None of the adaptations are, strictly speaking. Dr. Clayton Forrester superficially resembles the book's narrator in that both are men of science who bear witness to the Martian invasion, but they have completely different backgrounds and arcs. Spielberg moved yet further from the book's scientist protagonist by focusing instead on a working-class divorced father as his entry point into the Martian War. Also lost from the novel is the setting. Wells was writing at the tail end of Victorian-era England, and that's where he unleashes his Martians, but each adaptation has shifted to the contemporary, a tradition which goes back to the Orson Welles radio play, which moved the action to New Jersey in the late 1930s. The 1953 film set the action in the 50s in California, while Spielberg updated the plot to the 2000s and shifted back to the East Coast, as our main characters journey from New York to Boston. The story's shifting setting has historically reflected the shifts in imperial power across the globe, and the shifting concerns of those powers. The novel identifies England as the heart of empire, and subjects it to the same conquest as England had its many colonies. The Orson Welles radio play was broadcast in 1938, less than a year before the Nazis invaded Poland, and is shrouded in the thick atmosphere of fear that the world is at the precipice of war. The 1953 film emerges from the other side of that war, with America a dominant global superpower, but in the midst of the Cold War, and the shadow of nuclear powers so vast and terrifying they dwarf any nation-state. And of course, Spielberg's film released just 4 years after 9/11, and is finally dialed into the mood of a country reeling from a collective trauma, of the most powerful nation in the world suddenly made naked and vulnerable by a surprise attack, plunged into war, afraid, and frothing for revenge.
And we get back at them! We get back at them!
All that to say, it's fine that War of the Worlds 2025 is set in modern day and full of contemporary technologies and software, or that Ice Cube plays a DHS agent at odds with his son about the degree to which the United States has become a surveillance state spying on its own citizens. Much of what makes the novel special is its ability to be repurposed for contemporary political issues, or at least in this case, contemporary-ish. The expansion of US surveillance powers under the Patriot Act was passed almost 25 years ago. Edward Snowden's NSA leak was over 10 years ago. Hell, even the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where whistleblowers revealed the severity of Facebook's unauthorized data harvesting of its users, happened last decade. I'm not saying surveillance isn't still an important issue, but it's not exactly the pressing concern of the 2020s. And by extension, the film is not capturing the cultural zeitgeist the same way previous adaptations have. But, whatever. It's a different take on the novel, and there is something cogent about adapting War of the Worlds as a screen life movie, a movie where all the action takes place within a desktop screen. On the surface, that might seem unbecoming for a story which has produced such cinematic spectaculars, with the 1953 film especially something of a landmark in movie special effects, but it's a sensible change which reflects how people absorb information today. If a Martian attack were to actually occur tomorrow, it would play out across laptop and smartphone screens, with news of the attack and desperate calls to loved ones occupying the same space. Producer Tamir Bekmambetov, who's made screen life movies his signature style in recent years, said as much upon the film's release. And he also correctly links the film's integration of contemporary communication technologies into the storytelling with what Orson Welles did in 1938. Wells didn't just record an audio adaptation of the novel, he replicated the style of radio news broadcasts, telling parts of the story as if it were legitimate reporting of a Martian invasion, hence the famous stories of listeners tuning into the broadcast late and assuming what they were hearing was actually happening. Other adaptations have been more straightforward and haven't experimented so much with form, but they still integrated news media into their storytelling. The 53 version takes some influence from newsreels in its stage-setting prologue.
The Second World War involved every continent on the globe, and men turned to science for new devices of warfare.
Spielberg's film observes how the early signs of Martian invasion are drowned out in the background noise of the 24-hour TV news cycle. Even the novel addresses how news is communicated, with the narrator explaining how knowledge of the invasion took time to spread through the country until newspapers began reporting on what was happening. The War of the Worlds has always been mediated by the mass communication technologies of the times. A screen-life version in 2025 is a sensible evolution of that mediation. I'd even go so far as to say it's one of the best reasons to remake The War of the Worlds now. How would H.G. Wells' Martian invasion look in an era of mass interconnectivity, high-speed internet, and a constant barrage of digital stimulus? It's a worthwhile question. And it might be tempting to say, but the film's execution is abjectly horrid at every level, so all that potential is squandered. And that is true, but it's not the whole truth. The fundamental problem with War of the Worlds 2025 is not that it's a screen-life movie or that its take on surveillance is a decade late. It's that the film forgets that the novel is a horror story. The War of the Worlds is about being trampled underfoot by a species far beyond ourselves, and is full of sequences of suspense, of grim and disturbing images, and of prose quantifying humanity's weakness in the face of a seemingly invincible enemy. If I had to boil down the feeling the novel instills to just one word, it would be powerlessness. We don't understand the Martians, we can only barely intuit what they want with our planet and with us, and our efforts to fight back are mostly futile. There are a couple of hope spots where a couple tripods get taken down, but all human victories are modest and short-lived, and quickly rendered meaningless as the Martians continue their advance with minimal interruption. They are stronger, more technologically advanced, and more ruthless. Historically, this powerlessness has been reflected on film. The Martians in the 53 version are even more powerful than their book counterparts. While the English army at least manages to take down a couple tripods, not a single war machine is brought down by the US Army. Not even an atom bomb can penetrate their shields. But at least the film's characters can mount some offense. Spielberg's protagonist is a working-class Joe who knows nothing about the Martians and has no delusions about defeating them. He just wants to keep his family and himself safe. His son has delusions about defeating the Martians, and, well, those don't really work out. The 2025 version does sort of understand that powerlessness is a key theme of the story. At least Ice Cube's daughter gives a big speech about how he needs to accept he's not all powerful and he's too controlling or whatever, but this theme is not reflected in the invasion itself. Martians touch down, and Cube's surveillance drones immediately assess the threat, pinpointing the tripod's attack patterns and weaknesses, allowing the military to launch a counteroffensive. And it works. The war starts with the humans winning, kicking Martian ass.
Woo, hell yeah. Took your ass out, huh? Take your intergalactic asses back home. Back home!
Go America! Woo 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 woo. The novel and its earlier adaptations were about empires brought to their knees. This movie is about an empire casually brushing off another surface nuisance. That is, until the Martians get into our data centers, which suddenly shifts the war in their favor. Now things are looking dark. But don't worry, guys. Cube and his family have got the solution. Which... okay, let's backtrack a bit. The one other constant in different versions of War of the Worlds, besides Martian invasion, is the ending, where the aliens are defeated not by men, but by bacteria. The earthly pathogens, which humans have developed a natural immunity from, are foreign to the Martians, resulting in a viral infection which kills off the invaders. It's a brilliant ending, a clever piece of science fiction writing, and maybe more crucially, a reprieve that still denies catharsis. We don't win the War of the Worlds, we survive it, and we survive it through evolutionary circumstance rather than our own wit or will. It's ostensibly a happy ending, but one that maintains and reinforces the powerlessness at the heart of the story. For all the dominance humanity has exerted over the world, we are still beholden to forces beyond our control. The 1953 and 2005 versions keep this ending, though admittedly neither quite nail it. The former climaxes with our main characters in a church, a final refuge when all hope seems lost, when suddenly the Martian war machines crash down and the invaders die out. Dialogue explains bacteria is responsible, but the images overwhelmingly suggest a higher power has intervened, that God himself has stepped in to destroy the Martians and save humanity. Roots of this are found in the novel, but it's subtle, with the narrator describing the Martians as having been slain after all man's devices had failed by the humblest things that God, in his wisdom, has put upon the earth. Later adding that God had repented, that the angel of death had slain them in the night. But the 53 version really lays it on thick, not just in its final moments either, but elsewhere, like when Martians vaporize a priest at the start of the war. Or this line.
The Martians can conquer the Earth in 6 days.
The same number of days it took to create it.
It's a little eye-rolling, and even if I were more receptive to God saving the day, the execution is still really heavy-handed. Spielberg's ending, meanwhile, is undercut by Hollywoodisms. There's of course the reveal that the son somehow survived being blown up and even managed to make it to his mom in Boston, which is patently absurd and thematically incoherent. This kid was a mouthpiece for the irrational, emotionally driven call for revenge in response to a national trauma, and the self-destruction such yearning leads to. Why is he here now except to offer some trite happy ending? There's also what passes for the movie's climax. While it is a virus that kills off the Martians, we still get a scene where the army notices a tripod's force field is inactive and take it down with a rocket launcher, a gesture towards catharsis that neither the novel nor the 53 film makes. It feels like a concession to the expectations of blockbuster filmmaking. We can't just end with all the Martians dying from a virus, that's not exciting enough. Maybe the army can blow one up. It's a worst of both worlds. Too much action for an ending which really shouldn't have any, but as an action scene, it's so limp and uninspired compared to the evocative nightmares the film has subjected us to elsewhere, and ends up feeling more anticlimactic than if there hadn't been any climax at all. War of the Worlds movies have always struggled with the ending, but wow, is the 2025 version a shocking new low. I have my issues with these conclusions, but they at least capture the spirit of Wells's novel. The world is saved by a force beyond the human. Ray is left in the traumatic wreckage of a world in rubble, and will likely suffer a nervous breakdown just as the novel's narrator did. But no such fate awaits Ice Cube, baby. He's got it all figured out. Rather than wait around for pathogens to kill the Martians like some sort of beta, Cube simply repurposes the code that his daughter wrote for destroying cancer cells and uses it to infect the data centers the Martians are after. So when the Martians absorb that data, they become infected and are destroyed. So they're still defeated by an infection, but a cyber infection. As a subversion of the novel, it's not very clever. It's basically the exact same twist Independence Day pulled 30 years ago, except somehow even dumber and more convoluted. It's also worth mentioning this is where the Amazon product placement comes in, since the only way for Cube to get the USB drive that's been loaded with the kill code in time is by placing an order on Amazon and having the drive delivered via Prime Air, which Devin Bostick helpfully explains is the future of delivery.
Oh, it's the future of delivery.
Thank you, Devin. This is obviously awful, but weirdly also the least offensive aspect of the ending, An in-film ad so crass and vulgar, it's almost transcendent, like Duchamp placing a urinal in an art gallery. Just a stunning defiance of the norms of good taste. More egregious is how this spits in the face of the powerlessness at the heart of War of the Worlds. How a story which has historically explored the precarity of empires has become a story about how any problem can be solved with a little ingenuity, elbow grease, and help from your favorite tech company. And solved rather easily at that. How does such a monumentally boneheaded misunderstanding of the source novel, which itself is one of the most famous science fiction stories of all time, how does that even make it to the screen? Turns out, the answer is dirt simple. We ultimately have to look to the producer. No, not Tamir, this guy, Patrick Aiello. In interviews, Aiello has said that his initial idea for the film was to make a tentpole blockbuster, but on the budget and schedule of a Screen Life movie, and he chose War of the Worlds specifically because it was a recognizable IP which told a big story and was in the public domain. In other words, the principal animating force behind War of the Worlds 2025 was to make a faux blockbuster as quickly and as cheaply as possible. It was never going to be a good Screen Life movie or a good War of the Worlds movie because those frameworks were, first and foremost, cost-cutting measures, a means to an end. Hollywood producer wanted to make as much money on as little investment as possible. Tale as old as time. It's such a cliche, you might wonder why I got so worked up I made a whole video about it. It's not like there haven't been other terrible movies based on Wells's novel that this video has completely ignored, along with a loose adaptation from Poland in 1981, which sounds insane and honestly kind of awesome, but we don't have time to get into that. This video has already ballooned beyond the lighthearted quickie I initially envisioned it as. The point I'm trying to make is if this War of the Worlds, terrible though it unquestionably is, really deserved this time and attention. I think so, because I can't help but think about the wasted potential, given the world did recently survive a global catastrophe. A catastrophe which revealed the precarity of the world's empires. COVID killed millions and brought the typical operations of daily life globally to a screeching halt. It was also a catastrophe vast swaths of people experienced through screens, isolated at home with an internet connection and not much to do but look on powerlessly at a world in crisis, with no answers or recourse. COVID would be fought against in the form of vaccine development, but for the average person in the thick of the pandemic, there was no winning, just surviving, wearing a mask, maintaining social distancing, and eventually getting vaccinated, all while trying to stay sane while stuck at home. Now's probably a good time to mention my favorite part of Wells's novel, when the narrator is trapped in the ruins of a dilapidated home with nothing to do but observe the Martian threat outside, eat and drink the dwindling rations, and try to get along with the person he's stuck with. A contemporary War of the Worlds is incredibly salient in a post-pandemic world. A Screen Life version, which replicates how we consumed the horrific news and stayed in contact with loved ones during those scary times, even more so. This is why the film's framing of humanity defeating the Martians bothers me so much. Not merely because it's unfaithful to the novel, but for failing to reckon with how it actually felt to live through the 2020s, despite the source text being perfectly suited to that end. What a waste. Film critic Jay Haberman has said that every generation gets its own adaptation of the War of the Worlds, and it's a shame that a generation which could have really used a good one are stuck with something that so woefully fails to meet the moment. One consolation? At least it's funny.
Took your ass out, huh?
Collecting data? Oh, man.
Prime Air, it's the future of delivery.
At times like this, I guess all you can do is laugh.